everyone. I'm 𝘱𝘳𝘦𝘦𝘴𝘴. I'm a senior studying public policy and journalism at Princeton. Today I'll be sharing some thoughts on immigration in Toledo, and I can start by telling you a bit about how I arrived at this interest. So my first real field reporting experience was at the center of one of the world's major crises. With one journalism course under my belt, I landed a spot on a team reporting on the refugee crisis in Greece. I spent hours and hours interviewing refugees, many of whom had just arrived on flimsy rafts days or even hours earlier. And listening back to my recorded interviews, I noticed two questions were repeated often. To me, these two questions defined the immigrant experience, and they guided me on my research as I continued to explore immigration the past few years. They're quite simple. They were, how did you get here, and where do you need to go? I asked this question to refugees and immigrants at many different phases of the immigrant journey: well-established leaders of immigrant communities, refugees newly arrived at their destinations, and even a political prisoner still in his home country, considering his prospects of immigration. And when I began this virtual internship experience in Toledo this summer, I searched for the familiar, and I was excited to learn that the city had a long history of immigration. I learned it had also made national headlines for welcoming refugees a few years ago, so I decided to study the past, present, and future of immigration to Toledo, asking those same two questions, not only to the city's immigration experts, but to the city itself. How did Toledo get here? And where does Toledo need to go? I found answers to these questions in the city's relationship with immigration, and I'll share them with you today. Immigrants began to arrive in Toledo in the 1840s, mostly from Germany and Ireland at first. Job opportunities in various manufacturing industries attracted them to the city. And as the immigrant communities grew, they established neighborhoods: Lanks Hill, Little Syria, Birmingham. They brought life to a city in its infancy, multiplying the population. In 1890, 82% of Toledoans were either first or second generation immigrants. And the immigrants also built businesses that have become part of the foundation of the city. If you've ever been to Toledo, odds are you've had a hot dog from Tony Packo's. Packo was the son of Hungarian immigrants who lived in a Hungarian neighborhood in Toledo. Many remember this time between the 1840s and the 1960s as a time of economic growth and success for the city. The population rapidly increased, and Toledo was a hub of industry. So how did Toledo get here, to where it is today? Eventually, US immigration policies establishing quotas began to hinder the arrival of immigrants to the US, and therefore to Toledo. Immigrants already in the city chose to move to the suburbs as industries moved elsewhere. From 1970 to 2010, the city lost about 100,000 people. Today's Toledo is much different from yesterday's. So the question is, if immigration was able to define Toledo in the past, can immigration redefine Toledo now? So for the second part of my research, I looked at the present, asking, where does Toledo need to go? Yes, the topic of immigration is now much more complicated. We have refugees, asylum seekers, green card lottery winners, dreamers. For the purpose of our discussion today, we can look at the two concepts at the heart of immigration, shared by all of these immigrant groups: mobility and construction. And interestingly enough, these two factors also lie at the heart of Toledo. By mobility, I mean not only the ability to move across physical borders, but also out of poverty or to higher levels of education. And by construction, I mean not only the construction of physical barriers and walls, but also the construction of communities through which we exclude and include. Through considering these two concepts of mobility and construction, we can begin to visualize the true potential of a city like Toledo. And I found a lot of potential. Toledo is in many ways well situated to accept immigrants today. And this is in large part due to its history of accepting immigrants in the past. When Syrian refugees arrived in Toledo in 2017, they were able to make it in the city through the help of several organizations. Among these organizations are those established by long-standing immigrant communities in the city, like the Arab community. Here comes in the factor of construction. In Toledo, a culture of strong immigrant communities addresses one of the major concerns that immigrants have, which is, where do I find my roots? They arrive to find their roots already deep in the city. The presence of these communities leads to the next aspect: mobility. Through these communities, Toledo has strong resources that facilitate the mobility of immigrants. There's language access and culturally sensitive assistance. Not only are the resources available, even niche organizations like the Epworth Furniture Ministry, which provides furniture for people who need it, but also, and perhaps more importantly, The welcoming attitude is widely present. The memories of past immigration are still present, allowing Toledoans to empathize with families seeking a better life in the city. Manifestations of this connection between past immigration and current immigration are not uncommon. I'll tell you about one I've witnessed personally. On a reporting trip, I interviewed refugees and resettlement coordinators living in the Canadian city of Winnipeg in the province of Manitoba. The city has a long history of immigration and thriving Ukrainian and German communities. Volunteers and officials would frequently mention this history when explaining their successful refugee resettlement programs. They would say, "My grandparents were Ukrainian immigrants. They had a chance in this country. Why can't Syrians? Why can't Nigerians?" Repeated so frequently as if it was a common sense part of their immigration policy. The positive effects of this acceptance were very clear. So the consideration of the connection between past and current immigration in Toledo is very important, and it's also shared by community organizers assisting refugees and immigrants in the city. When I asked the director of the Toledo office of Us Together, a refugee resettlement agency, what attracts immigrants to Toledo, her immediate response was, "Well, let's go back to the 1800s and 1900s. Her direct answer was to turn to the city's history. And now that we've considered the past and present of immigration in the city, let's think about the future. One obvious factor is the economic benefit. Immigrants and refugees start businesses at a higher rate than US-born Americans. There are more immigrants now with college degrees than ever before. Welcome TLC, a Toledo agency advocating for immigrants and refugees, estimated that immigrants were able to save 756 manufacturing jobs in Lucas County in 2010. They also make up significant percentages of the county's high-tech and STEM workforces. I won't bore you too much with the numbers, but this all means that immigrants can be an asset to any American city seeking revitalization. In Toledo's case, immigrants can counteract the damage done by depopulation and brain drain, the loss of professionals from the city. And the benefits are not just economic. The wealth and diverse perspectives, art, food, music is invaluable. I saw evidence of this effective economic and cultural revitalization in the communities I explored in Winnipeg, Canada as well. Refugees who had arrived only a few months earlier seemed to truly belong to the city. Young immigrants established a refugee acting company and a new Arab Canadian radio station. One Syrian father living in a rural part of the province boasted a growing farm with 40 sheep, which he acquired with the help of fellow farmers in his Canadian community. And several interviewees insisted that the fruits grown by the Syrian farmers were the sweetest. So whether it was new businesses or the farmers sharing the literal fruit of acceptance, there was no doubt that immigrants and refugees had brought a new life to this area. In a way, that's where Toledo needs to go. But these goals of revitalization through immigration do not come without challenges. Much like the policies limiting immigration in the 1920s, policies of the Trump administration have significantly decreased the number of refugees admitted to the US. They lowered the number from 110,000 to 18,000. They also have made legal immigration routes much more difficult to undertake. The constant threats to programs like the diversity visa lottery and the H-1B visa are causing these challenges. And while this might be hard to imagine today, immigration was not always this divisive partisan issue. Even during the Bush administration, the two parties agreed on the importance of immigration. They disagreed about specific methods of managing it, but it was not a question of whether we should open the doors to immigrants at all. Rising tides of nationalism have made the use of immigration as a political tool more attractive. Heads of state, including our own, claiming that if immigration policy came down to the states, to the cities, to the people, we would choose to exclude. But these attempts to push us towards intolerance have had an unintended consequence. They've put the immigration debate back in our hands. The role of cities is now becoming more important than ever before, as the Trump administration has pushed to allow cities and states to make their own decisions regarding immigration. Now, we can look at the history of our city, the history of Toledo, consider the mounting evidence of growth led by immigrants, and conclude that we know where we have been, and we know where we need to go, and we also know how to get there. So to earn the countless benefits which cities gain from immigrants, Toledo does not only need to maintain its strong community resources, but it can also engage in advocacy. There are many ways cities can advocate for immigrants. They can join the sanctuary space movement, which supports the protection of undocumented immigrants, and of which Lucas County is now a participant. Cities can even go above the heads of the federal government, directly engaging in international programs, focusing on the well-being of immigrants and refugees. I know it's a bit confounding to imagine Toledo getting its 15 minutes of fame at the United Nations or some global organization, but the city's history truly makes it an important voice in discussions of immigration. It's a testament to the power of a population strong in numbers, the effects that the rise and fall of an immigrant population can have. It's time for the American city to be at the forefront of immigrant acceptance and advocacy. And in this area, Toledo has the potential to be a true leader. Thank you.